The air in the emergency department was a stagnant soup, thick with the smells of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the low-tide tang of human fear. It was a kingdom of controlled chaos, ruled by the relentless hum of fluorescent lights and the anxious symphony of beeping monitors. In this kingdom, Alara Vance was a ghost, a creature of the quiet spaces, moving with a deliberate slowness that everyone mistook for incompetence. Her scrubs, a size too large, hung on her frame, further obscuring the coiled steel beneath. She was fumbling with a new IV pump, her fingers seeming to be all thumbs as she tried to thread the tubing. The machine beeped in protest, a shrill, mocking sound that drew the gaze of head nurse Reynolds. Reynolds descended like a hawk, her presence announced by the sharp clack of her expensive shoes on the linoleum and the cloying wave of her jasmine perfume. She was a woman, sculpted from sharp angles and sharper condescension, her authority worn like a designer suit. "Vance, are you having trouble with a simple pump? A toddler could figure it out. We have patients to see, you know. This isn't a vocational class." Her voice was a whip crack, intended for the entire floor to hear. Alara didn't look up, her gaze fixed on the plastic tubing. "Just calibrating, head nurse Reynolds," she murmured, her voice flat and soft. Internally, she cataloged the woman's tells. The slight tremor in her left eyelid when annoyed. The way she shifted her weight to her right foot before launching into a tirade. Threat level, 0. Annoyance level, significant. "Just do it faster," Reynolds snapped, before turning on her heel and sweeping away, leaving a wake of perfume and intimidation. Alara took a slow, measured breath, a 4-count inhale she had learned in a place that smelled of cordite and hot dust, not antiseptic. In, hold, out. The pressure in her chest, the familiar ghost of anger, receded. She finished threading the IV tubing with a single, precise motion that was too quick for anyone to notice. The earlier clumsiness, a deliberate, practiced mask. Anonymity was the mission. This ER was her sanctuary, her penance. The price of admission was this daily, grinding humiliation. She was willing to pay it. Her mind, a tactical computer that had once directed kill boxes and triage in the screaming chaos of an ambush, was now occupied with stocking supply closets and cleaning bedpans. It was a form of meditation, a deliberate dulling of the senses, but the machine was always running, always assessing. 2 exits on this floor, one a bottleneck near the ambulance bay. Security response time, 3 minutes, 40 seconds on average. The man in bed 5 had the telltale pallor of internal bleeding, something the attending had missed while distracted by a phone call. She had silently swapped his chart to the top of the pile. She was a janitor of lives, quietly cleaning up messes before anyone knew they were made. A group of soldiers, fresh from a training accident at the nearby base, had been brought in earlier. They filled a corner of the ER with their boisterous, pained energy. One of them, a corporal named Davis, with a dislocated shoulder and a cocky grin, had been watching her. "Hey, Nurse Fumbles," he'd called out earlier, when she'd nearly dropped a tray of instruments. "You sure you're in the right line of work?" His friends had chuckled. Alara had just given him a brief, empty look and continued her work. Inside, she had assessed his injury, the angle of his arm, the tension in his jaw. She knew exactly the maneuver to reduce the dislocation, the precise amount of force required. She also knew it wasn't her place. So she said nothing. Maya, a young nurse barely out of school, gave Alara a sympathetic look from across the nurses' station. Maya was kind, but her pity was just another layer of the mask Alara had to wear. It was heavy. Some days, the weight of it felt like body armor, a crushing pressure on her soul. The memory surfaced without warning, triggered by the smell of burnt toast from the break room. Not toast, burnt hair, burnt flesh. The ozone crackle of a detonating IED. The screaming. Sarge's screaming. His legs were gone. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. So much blood. She had worked on him, her hands moving with a speed and certainty that felt alien, her voice a low, commanding growl that cut through the panic of the other men. She had kept him alive for 23 minutes. It hadn't been long enough. Alara closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, pushing the memory back into its box. She focused on the squeak of her own rubber-soled shoes, the rough texture of a cheap paper towel in her hand, the banal reality of the here and now. The past was a locked room. She was the warden, and she would not let the prisoners escape. Head Nurse Reynolds continued her reign of petty tyranny throughout the shift. She assigned Alara to clean the commodes in the isolation rooms, a task usually reserved for orderlies. She lost the paperwork for Alara's requested day off, the first she had asked for in 6 months. Then came the formal reprimand. Reynolds had cornered her by the medication carts. "Vance, I'm writing you up." She held a clipboard like a weapon. "You changed the fluid rate on Mr. Henderson's drip without authorization." His urine output was low and his pressure was dropping. He was becoming hypotensive, Alara stated, her voice kept deliberately neutral. "I adjusted it per the standing orders for suspected dehydration." "You are not a doctor. You are not even a competent nurse," Reynolds hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You do not make judgment calls. You follow the orders you are given. Is that understood?" "Understood, Head Nurse Reynolds." The words tasted like ash. Alara's jaw was a block of granite. Her knuckles, hidden in the pockets of her scrubs, were white. She could feel the ghost of a rifle grip in her palm, the familiar weight of it a comforting phantom limb. The wall she maintained around her composure was thick, but Reynolds was throwing herself against it again and again, oblivious to the immense, restrained force on the other side. Alara wanted this quiet life. She needed it. The price was this slow-motion erosion of her spirit. She just didn't know how much more she could pay. The breaking point wasn't a slow crumble. It was an explosion. It began not with a bang, but with a tone. A specific, tritone alert that cut through the normal ER chatter like a shard of glass. It wasn't the fire alarm or a standard code. It was the sound of utter catastrophe. The red phone at the charge nurse's station, a relic rarely used, began to flash. Reynolds stared at it for a full second, her face a mask of confusion. Then the voice came over the intercom, stripped of its usual bored cadence, tight with adrenaline. "Code Black, mass casualty incident. I repeat, Code Black, southbound I-5, multi-vehicle collision, chemical tanker involved. All available personnel to the emergency department. Now." The world seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat. Then it shattered. Chaos erupted. Nurses and techs started shouting, running in different directions. Orders were screamed and immediately forgotten. The controlled chaos of the ER devolved into a pure, shrieking bedlam. Head Nurse Reynolds, the paragon of authority, became its first victim. Her face went slack, then pale. Her hands began to visibly shake. Get the crash carts," she yelled, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "Everyone, prepare for admissions. We need more beds." Her orders were superficial, useless, a child playing at command. She was frozen, a statue of incompetence in the heart of the storm. For Alara, the opposite happened. The moment the Code Black was announced, the heavy pressure that had been sitting on her chest for 2 years vanished. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety in her mind went silent. The shouting, the panic, the fear around her faded into manageable static, a data stream to be processed and filtered. Her heart rate, which had been elevated by her confrontation with Reynolds, dropped. It settled into a slow, steady rhythm, a drummer in the deep, quiet center of the hurricane. Her senses, deliberately dulled for so long, came online with crystalline clarity. She could smell the faint trace of gasoline on a paramedic rushing past, hear the specific pitch of a monitor 2 bays over indicating hypoxia, feel the subtle vibration through the floor as the first gurneys were slammed out of the ambulance. This was not a hospital anymore. This was a battle space, and she was home. The first wave of casualties hit the doors like a tsunami of broken bodies and screaming metal. The paramedics were overwhelmed, their faces grim. "We've got dozens more coming. The whole highway is a wreck." Reynolds, finally spurred into motion, did the worst possible thing. She started making decisions. "This one to Trauma 1, she shrieked, pointing at a man with a severe leg laceration. "That one. Put her in the hallway. She's just Hysterical! Alara saw the woman Reynolds had dismissed. She wasn't hysterical. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her abdomen was rigid, classic signs of internal hemorrhaging. Leaving her in the hallway was a death sentence. And she saw the man being rushed to the primary trauma bay. His leg was bad, but his airway was clear, and he was screaming, which meant he was breathing. Then they brought in Corporal Davis. The cocky young soldier was barely recognizable. His face was a mess of blood and grime, his uniform shredded. He was strapped to a backboard, a paramedic frantically bagging him. His eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond pain. "He was near the tanker. Possible inhalation plus crush injuries," the paramedic yelled. "His sats are dropping fast. He's closing up." Reynolds rushed over, her panic reaching a fever pitch. "Get an IV. 2 large bore. Get me a full panel. What's his pressure?" Alara was already moving, her steps no longer slow but impossibly fluid and economical. She appeared at the side of the gurney, her eyes scanning Davis's body with an intensity that was terrifying. She saw it instantly. The deviated trachea, barely visible under the grime, the distended veins in his neck, the asymmetrical chest movement as the paramedic forced air into his lungs. It wasn't an inhalation injury. It was a tension pneumothorax. His lung had collapsed, and every breath from the bag was just pumping air into his chest cavity, crushing his heart and his other lung. He had seconds, not minutes. "He needs a needle decompression," Alara said, her voice low and clear, cutting through the noise. Reynolds spun on her, her face contorted with fury and fear. "I am in charge here, Vance. He needs fluids. Get out of the way." She grabbed a bag of saline, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She was about to kill him. Out of pure, panicked incompetence, she was going to murder this boy in front of everyone. Something inside Alara snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a silent, catastrophic failure of the dam she had built around her soul. The duty to preserve her anonymity was annihilated by the duty to preserve life. The mission was over. "Move," Alara said. The word was not a request. It was a physical force, a blade of pure command. Reynolds froze, stunned by the tone. "I said, move." Alara didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice dropped into a register that promised swift, efficient violence. She placed a hand on Reynolds' shoulder. There was no heat, no anger in the touch. It was cold, impersonal, like a machine locking into place. She pushed the head nurse aside, not with a shove, but with an irresistible, fluid pressure. Reynolds stumbled back, her mouth agape. The mask of the clumsy, quiet subordinate did not just slip, it disintegrated. Alara's posture snapped ramrod straight, adding inches to her height. Her shoulders, which had been perpetually stooped in apology, squared. The hesitant, fumbling woman was gone. In her place stood a predator. Her gaze, once downcast and empty, was now a pair of hard, blue-gray lasers, sweeping the chaotic scene, assessing, prioritizing, deciding. She turned to the terrified paramedic. "Stop bagging him. You're killing him." The man flinched, but obeyed instantly, his hands dropping the bag as if it were hot. Alara's hand shot out, not to the IV cart, but to the trauma supply drawer. She didn't look. Her hand found exactly what it needed, a 14-gauge angiocath. Her movements were a blur of economy. Wipe, locate, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. A place she could find in her sleep, in the dark, under fire. Uncap, plunge. The needle sank into Corporal Davis's chest with practiced force. There was a soft pop, and then a loud, satisfying hiss as the trapped air, under immense pressure, escaped the pleural cavity. Corporal Davis gasped, a real, ragged breath. The monitor above his head, which had been screaming a descent into oblivion, chirped. The number for his oxygen saturation, which had been in the low 70s, jumped to 85, then 88, then 92. A collective, stunned silence fell over the immediate area. In the heart of the maelstrom, a pocket of awestruck calm had formed around Alara. She wasn't finished. She didn't even look at the monitor. She had heard the hiss. That was all the confirmation she needed. "You," she said, her voice like ice water, pointing to a young intern who was standing frozen, holding a clipboard. "He needs a chest tube. Get the kit. You've read about it. Today you do it. I'll walk you through. Move. The intern blinked, then nodded, a flicker of purpose returning to his eyes. He ran. Maya, who had been watching with wide, terrified eyes, jumped. Yes? 2 units, O-neg, pressure bag, IO drill to his left tibia. His pressure is still in the toilet. We'll get fluids into him through the bone. Go. Maya didn't question. She didn't look to Reynolds for confirmation. She saw the absolute, terrifying competence in Alara's eyes, and she obeyed. The established chain of command had evaporated, replaced by a new, more primal one. Follow the person who knows what the hell they are doing. Alara turned from Davis, her tactical computer of a mind already on the next problem. She swept the ER with her gaze, the chaos resolving itself into a series of clear, prioritized objectives. It was triage on a mass scale, a skill honed in dusty villages where the number of wounded outnumbered the living. Her movements were a brutal ballet of efficiency. She strode to the woman Reynolds had dismissed to the hallway. A quick palpation of the abdomen, a check of the pupils. Get her to OR3 now! Tell them to prep for an exploratory laparotomy, possible splenic rupture. Type and cross for 6 units. She didn't say it to anyone in particular, but a nearby orderly and nurse scrambled to comply, as if she had addressed them by name. She saw a man with a mangled arm, blood pulsing from a severed artery. A terrified tech was trying to apply pressure with a flimsy dressing, which was already soaked through. Alara was there in 3 long strides. Not like that! You're wasting time! She tore a strip of cloth from a nearby linen cart. She grabbed a stray tongue depressor. With movements too fast to follow, she fashioned a makeshift windlass tourniquet and cinched it high on the man's bicep. Twist. The bleeding slowed. Twist. It stopped. She grabbed a marker from her own pocket. Without looking, she wrote the time on the man's forehead. 14:32. He has 90 minutes before this arm is compromised. Get him in the queue for surgery, she commanded the tech, who could only nod, his face a mixture of fear and reverence. She moved on. A child with a head injury, pupils blown. No hope. Black tag. A cold, hard calculation. A life she couldn't save. She wasted no emotion, no time. There were others who could be saved. A woman screaming, a piece of rebar skewering her thigh. Alara knelt. Look at me, she commanded. The woman's panicked eyes locked onto hers. My name is Alara. Do not move. Do not try to pull it out. You will bleed to death. We are going to help you. Her voice was calm, a hypnotic anchor in the woman's sea of pain. She stabilized the rebar with rolls of gauze, her hands gentle but firm. Head nurse Reynolds watched this all from the periphery. She had tried to reassert herself once. Vance, you are not in charge here. You will be... Alara had turned her head, just enough to fix her with that dead, flat gaze. You are relieved, she had said, with the finality of a judge passing sentence. Go to the waiting room and manage the families. It's the one place you can't kill anyone. The words, spoken in that low, lethal tone, had struck Reynolds dumb. Humiliated and stripped of all authority in her own department, she had stumbled away, her face a mottled mask of rage and disbelief. The staff didn't even notice her departure. They were all focused on Alara. She was the command and control node. She stood in the center of the ER, not touching a single patient now, but directing the entire battle. Her commands were short, sharp, and precise. Trauma 2 is open. Next critical is the man with the abdominal evisceration. Cover with a moist, sterile dressing and move him. We need another surgeon. Page Dr. Evans. Tell him it's a vascular emergency. That burn victim needs silver sulfadiazine and a sterile wrap. Now. The staff, who minutes before had been a panicked mob, were now a functioning unit. They moved with purpose, their actions guided by the calm, authoritative voice at the center of the storm. Maya, her face smeared with blood, but her eyes shining, acted as her lieutenant, relaying orders and fetching supplies. The young intern successfully inserted the chest tube under Alara's remote guidance. The tech held the tourniquet, a vital cog in the machine. They were her team. She had forged them in the crucible of the crisis. The soldiers from the training accident, those who were conscious, watched from their gurneys in stunned silence. They had mocked this woman. They had called her Nurse Fumbles. Now they watched her orchestrate the saving of lives with the detached, ruthless efficiency of a battlefield commander. They recognized it. They had seen it in the best of their own NCOs and officers. It was the calm of the truly dangerous, the stillness of the hyper-competent. They looked at her not with derision, but with a deep, profound, and slightly fearful respect. 2 hours later, the storm had passed. The last of the critical patients were in surgery or stabilized in the ICU. The ER, though still a wreck of discarded medical supplies and bloodstains, was quiet. The air no longer smelled of fear, but of exhaustion and the metallic aftermath of battle. Alara stood by the nurse's station, her posture finally slumping. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. The weight of her anonymity, which had been so crushing, had been replaced by the heavier weight of her true self. The ghost was out of the bottle. She didn't know how to put it back in. The door to the ER director's office was closed. Alara knew what was happening inside. Reynolds would be screaming, demanding her termination, her license, her head. It didn't matter. The mission was compromised. It was time to move on, find a new town, a new hospital, a new mask. She was wiping Corporal Davis's name from a whiteboard when the office door opened. Reynolds emerged, her face a triumphant sneer. Behind her was the hospital administrator, a man whose expression was pinched and uncertain. "Vance," Reynolds barked, her confidence restored now that the danger was past. "In the office. Now. You have a lot to answer for." Alara felt a wave of profound tiredness. She didn't have the energy for this part. She simply nodded and walked toward the office, her feet dragging. This was the debriefing she had been dreading, the end of her quiet life. She stepped into the small, sterile office. Reynolds stood behind the desk, arms crossed, radiating smug authority. The administrator wrung his hands by the window. "Your conduct today was an act of gross insubordination," Reynolds began, her voice dripping with venom. "You endangered patients, you countermanded my direct orders, and you physically assaulted me. You are a reckless liability. As of this moment, you are fired. Security will escort you from the building. We will be reporting you to the State Nursing Board and pursuing legal action." Alara didn't respond. She simply stood there, waiting for it to be over. Her mind was already packing, planning her next move. A small town in Montana, maybe. Or Oregon. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one would ever look for her. The administrator cleared his throat. "Now, Helen, perhaps we should—" He was cut off by a sharp knock on the open office door. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall and lean, in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. He wore the crisp, decorated uniform of a full colonel in the United States Army. His presence filled the room, sucking the air out of it. His gaze was calm, analytical, and missed nothing. He moved with a quiet, absolute confidence that made Reynolds's performative authority look like a child's tantrum. His eyes swept the room, passed over the administrator, dismissed Reynolds entirely, and landed on Alara. A flicker of recognition, of profound sadness, crossed his face. "Captain Vance," he said. His voice was a low baritone, a gravelly sound of command that had been earned, not given. "It's been a long time." Alara's shoulders tensed. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. "Colonel Jackson." Reynolds stared between the two of them, her triumphant expression curdling into confusion. "Colonel, I'm not sure what business you have here, but this is a private hospital matter. This woman—" Colonel Jackson turned his head slowly and fixed her with a look of such profound, cold disappointment that she physically recoiled. "Head Nurse Reynolds," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I have a roster of 32 men involved in today's incident. 17 of them were brought to this hospital. Because of the actions of Captain Vance, all 17 of them are still alive. My initial reports suggest that had you remained in command, I would be writing letters to at least 3, possibly 4, grieving families tonight. So I would advise you, with the utmost sincerity, to be silent." The silence that followed was absolute. The colonel turned his attention back to Alara. "I was at the base when the call came in. I came to check on my men. Corporal Davis is awake. He's grateful. He paused.